10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Shout out to our professor, Miss Berna. Annyeonghaseyo! In our first vlog, we're going to share a story about Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Incident in the Life of a Slave Girl is a slave narrative that was published in 1861 by Harriet Jacobs using the pen name of Linda Brent. So the book is an in-depth chronological account of Jacob's life as a slave and the decision and choices she made to gain freedom to herself and to her children. It addresses the struggles and sexual abuse that young women slaves face on the plantation and how these struggles were harsher than what men suffered as a slave. The book is considered sentimental and written to provoke an emotional response and sympathy from the reader toward slavery in general and slave women in particular situations for their struggles with rape, the pressure to have sex at an early age, the selling of their children, and the treatment of female slaves by their mistresses. In the book, Jacob addresses white northern women who fail to comprehend the evils of slavery. She makes direct appeals to their humanity to expand their knowledge and influence their thought about slavery as an institution. So, let's check it out, the author's background. So, let's have here the author's background. So, Harriet Jacobs is an African-American writer under the pseudonym of Linda Brent. So, when we say pseudonym, it is a pen name used by the author in her narrative story. So, Linda Brent was born in 1813 in Edenton, North Carolina to Delilah Horniblow, enslaved by the Horniblow family who owned a local tavern. Both Harriet and her brothers, John, were enslaved at birth by the tavern keeper's family. While Harriet's mother and grandmother were known by their owner family name of Horniblow, Harriet used the opportunity of the baptism of her children to register Jacobs as their family name. After Harriet's mother died, her father married a free African-American. The only child from that marriage was Harriet's half-brothers, was called Elijah, after his father, and always used Knox as his family name, which was the name of his father's enslaver. Jacob was sexually harassed by her enslaver when he threatened to sell her children if she did not submit to his desire. She hid in a tiny crawl space under the roof of her grandmother's house, so slow that she could not stand up in it. So, after staying there for 7 years, she finally managed to escape to the free north, where she was reunited with her children, Joseph and Louisa Matilda, and her brother John S. Jacobs. She found work as nanny and got into contact with abolitionists and feminist reformers. Even in New York, her freedom was in danger until her employer was able to pay off her legal owner. When Jacob was 6 years old, her mother died. She then lived with her owner, a daughter of a deceased tavern keeper, who taught her not only to sew, but also to read and write. Only very few slaves were literate. Although it was only in 1830 that North Carolina explicitly outlawed teaching slaves to read and write. Although Harriet's brother John succeeded in teaching himself to read, he still wasn't able to write when he escaped from slavery as a young adult. In 1825, the owner of Harriet and John Jacobs died. She willed Harriet to her 3-year-old niece, Mary Matilda Norcom. Mary Matilda's father, the physician Dr. James Norcom, son-in-law of the deceased tavern keeper, became her de facto master. Her brother John and most of her other property was inherited by the tavern keeper's widow. Dr. Norcom hired John so that the Jacobs siblings lived together in his household. So the following death of widow, her slaves were sold at the New Year's Day auction in the year of 1828. Among them were Harriet brothers John, her grandmother Molly Horniblow, and Molly's son Mark. Being sold at public auction was traumatic experience for 12-year-old John. In chapter 1, it's all about childhood experience by Harriet Jacobs. In the first chapter, Jacobs began her narrative by explaining that she did not know she was a slave until she was 6 years old. Her father was a carpenter and she had a brother named William. She was very fond of her maternal grandmother, known as Aunt Marty, who was a remarkable woman. She was indispensable in the household and became a well-loved personage in the community. Aunt Marty had 5 children. Her youngest, Benjamin, was close in age to Harriet, so he was more like a brother than an uncle. The mistress she worked for was a kind of woman, and Harriet went to stay with her. This was a pleasant time, and Harriet was taught to read and write. Unfortunately, this woman died when Harriet was 12. After a week, the will was read, and it was determined that Harriet would go to the mistress' sister's daughter, Emily Flint, who was 5. In chapter 2, it is all about the new master and mistress. Harriet introduced the master of her new house, Dr. Flint, her previous mistress's sister's husband. William also came to live at this house, which brought Harriet much joy. But the brother and sister received cold looks, cold words, and cold treatment. This situation was made worse when Harriet learned her father died and she was not able to go his body. This she bitterly lamented. William shifted under these conditions, and Harriet only solace was her strong and comforting grandmother. Aunt Marty had been told she would be set free by her precious mistress, but Dr. Flint, a cautious man, decided to put her up in the auction block. Fortunately, the whole town knew and loved the elderly woman, and no one would bid on her. Finally, an old white woman brought her and then promptly gave her freedom. Harriet writes of Mrs. Flint, who was a weak woman in body but certainly not in the spirit, that compelled her to command and watch acts of violence perpetrated on her slaves. She was released withholding food from the slaves as well. Chapter 3, The Slaves' New Year's Day. Harriet explained that Dr. Flint was wealthy, with a house in the town, many farms, and about 50 slaves. Slaves in the south were hired on January 1st and worked until Christmas Eve. After a few holidays, auctions were held. The slaves that are unwilling to go with their new masters were brought. Harriet contrasts the happy time Fred women enjoyed on New Year Eve with the apprehension and fear that slave women felt. Chapter 4, The Slave Who Dared to Feel Like a Man. Harriet's grandmother was now the mistress. of her own snuggle little home and wished her grandchildren could share it with her. Benjamin and Harriet longed to join her. William was now 12. The three of them hated Dr. Flynn with a passion. Harriet writes, when he told me that I was made for his use, made to obey his command in everything, that I was nothing but a slave whose will must and should surrender to him, ever before had my puny arm feel half as strong. William and Harriet lamented their fate together. Harriet urged him to be good and forgiving, but knew that she was being hypocritical because she felt similarly ill disposed toward her lots. She inwardly resolved to never be conquered. Sadly, this resolution did not help her. The first time she was punished was when she received new shoes from her grandmother. She mistress disliked the noise they made, so commanded Harriet remove them and never put them back on again. Later, Harriet was made to run errands in snow barefoot. Dr. Flint refused to sell Harriet even though he received high offers for her. Harriet was glad that her little mistress loved her, but was worried when Dr. Flint said his daughter was faking her affection. One day, William came to Harriet and told her that Benjamin and the master had a quarrel. Benjamin resisted being whipped and threw Dr. Flint. Benjamin came to say goodbye and Harriet begged him not to go. But Benjamin was full of righteous anger. They exchanged farewells and Benjamin departed. He made it into a ship but was recognized and sent back to his master. He was then put in a jail. The jailer knew Harriet's grandmother and allowed her and Harriet and William to sneak in and visit him. Benjamin was angry and said he could not trust in God anymore. 3 months passed and Benjamin was not released or sold. He was filthy and morose, and any token of comfort sent by Harriet's grandmother did not make it to him. Harriet's grandmother was distraught. Harriet wrote of her despair. Could you have seen the mother clinging to her child when they fastened the irons upon his wrist? Could you have heard her heart-rending groans and seen her bloodshot eyes wander wildly? And from face to face, vainly pleading for mercy, could you have witnessed that damnable sin as I saw it? You would exclaim, slavery is damnable. Harriet's grandmother devoted her time to trying to free Benjamin. She wrote to a wise, gentle friend of hers who worked to help free Benjamin. Benjamin finally made it to New York. There, he encountered his brother Philip, who was there on business for his master. Benjamin begged Philip not to return, but the latter said he had to stay with their master. The two shared an emotional parting and no one ever heard from Benjamin again. However, when Philip came home, he announced to the family that Benjamin was free and they rejoiced heartily. Later, Harriet's grandmother was able to buy more. Chapter 5, The Trials of Girlhood. In Chapter 5, Harriet narrates how she was interred in dangerous time period for a slave girl. Her master began to whisper lecherous things into her ears. He was more than 40 years older than her, and she found him truly repulsive. She had no help from her mistress, who was viciously jealous of a slave woman. It was a terrible thing to be a slave girl. She grew up prematurely knowing evil things and was subject to the grossest violence of her mind and body. Harriet's master stalked her and made her worry. frightened and haunted. She wanted to confide in someone, but she felt ashamed to tell her grandmother of these impure things. Her presence was some protection, however, because Dr. Flint was afraid of her and greeted her scorching rebukes. Harriet suffered greatly from this man, and she writes, "Reader, it is not to awaken sympathy for myself that I am telling you truthfully what I suffered in slavery. I do it to kindle a flame of compassion in your hearts for all my sisters who are still in bondage, suffering as I once suffered." She called out to the free men and women in the north, wondering why do your tongues falter in maintenance of the right. Chapter 6. The Jealous Mistress. Harriet continued to suffer from Dr. Flint's dogging on her steps. Her mistress could have helped this young lady, but it was apparently a crime to want to be virtuous. Dr. Flint used exceedingly clever means to try and find Harriet and speak to her of vile things, and she would respond to him in anger. He grew enraged and her situation worsened. In Harriet turned 16, it was obvious that Mr. Flint displeased her very presence. She was incensed when she found out that Dr. Flint had selected Harriet to sleep with her daughter in his apartment. She called Harriet in and asked her to answer her question honestly. Harriet promised to do so. Mrs. Flint asked her to tell her everything that has happened between her husband and Harriet. Harriet complied. Mr. Flint's face showed rage, grief, and hopelessness. She often wept. As she was not a refined woman, Harriet bore that born of her jealousy and Harriet was made to sleep in a room adjoining her mistress's. Mrs. Flint behaved so strangely that Harriet feared on her own life. She tried to trick her husband into confessing, but he was too wily. Thankfully, they never whipped her because the whole town knew her that this would have exposed Dr. Flint's conduct. Harriet's grandmother began to notice things and tried to find ways to find her. But Dr. Flint always protested that she belonged to his daughter. Harriet ruminated on the evils of slavery, mentioning that Northerners were also complicit in sending fugitives back to the South and delighting in marrying their daughters to slave owners. She believes that she peculiar institution did morality, but she gives a few examples of a white people in which virtue was not wholly extinct. Chapter 7. The Lover. As detailed in this chapter, Harriet made the mistake of falling in love with a free black carpenter in the neighborhood. She had forgotten that in the land of my birth, the shadows are too dense for light to penetrate. Her lover wanted to buy her, but Dr. Flint would not consent. Even Mrs. Flint did not want to get rid of her in a way. In addition, the husband of the slave has no power to protect his wife. It seems that the slaves were not allowed any family ties of their own. Harriet talked to her grandmother about her fears. She then tried to appeal to a white woman friend of Dr. Flint's who had been kind to her, but she could not change the evil man's mind. He called Harriet into his study and asked if she wanted to be married. She said yes, and he grew angry, saying if she wanted to be married, she could marry one of his slaves. When she said it was right and honorable for her and her lover to feel affection for each other. So Dr. Flint struck her for the first time. Dr. Flint said he had the power to do what he wanted to punish her disrespect. But she said all would do is ask that his lover's name never be spoken again. At this moment, Harriet wrote that the truly hated him and hatred felt like the atmosphere of hell. So Dr. Flint ignored Harriet for a while after this encounter, but this grew too difficult for him and he left her a note. He said he wanted to go to Louisiana and planned to take her with him. Harriet figured this would not happen, and eventually the sheen was dropped. One day in the street, Harriet stopped to speak with her lover, and unfortunately, Dr. Flint saw them. He cursed her viciously, and Harriet knew that there was no hope for her and her lover, for their marriage could not protect him from Dr. Flint. So she encouraged him to go north where he could see about some property from an uncle and actually use his natural intelligence. He sadly agreed. Harriet wrote again, "The dream of my girlhood is over. I felt lonely and desolate." Analysis of the story. Harriet Jacobs' narrative, the first published narrative by a female former slave, is a remarkable adventure story, a poignant personal memoir that addresses the formation of identity and a testament to the evils of slavery. In these early chapters, Harriet introduces herself, a young slave girl who did not even know she was enslaved until she was 6, and the immoral and cruel master and mistress she worked for. Some of the major themes of the text are presented early on. These include the terrible severing of familial ties in slave families, the hypocrisy and empathy of white Southerners, and the particular trials of slave women through their lustful persecutions by their white master. Jacob's story is of such significance because for so long, the voices of black women were, as scholar Johnny M. Stover writes, ignored, sentimentalized, or reduced in scope as addenda to the ableism-inspired text. 19th century autobiographies by black women used their unique voices to interpret life experiences in the context of America that sought to deny the identity of Africa-Americans within the format of an autobiography, which Jacobs chooses to tell her tale. Black women can attack the literary, sociology, and political systems that seek to marginalize them. Their narratives both blatantly and subtly demonstrate their capacity to use their voices instead of remaining silent. One literary strategy Harriet Jacobs employs in her autobiography is that of the sentimental novel. This genre is immensely popular with white women in 19th century, usually pitted a virtuous female heroine against the predatory man. The heroine either died or triumphed, and became a paragon of morality and femininity. In this chapter, Jacob appeals to the sympathies of these white women. Her primary audience, by presenting herself as a virtue and humble, showcasing the evil of Dr. Flint and focusing on the relationship between mothers and children. She is trying to equalize the relationship between herself and her readership. These readers will also note that Harriet Jacobs, like other black women writers, does not separate herself from her community. Oftentimes, the female narrator's voice is not just one voice, but many. Jacob will often step outside of her narration and encourage the reader to some realization or sentiment. This is different from slave narratives written by men such as Frederick Douglass or Alauda Equiano. In these narratives, the male figure is independent, authoritative, strong, and heroic. There is not as much of a focus of familial or communal ties. One of the ways in which Harriet Jacobs receives operation in her autobiography is through language. An African-American vernacular has been long recognized as created and developed by slaves. This was a way of speaking that was not a new language, but a way of reshaping the language of the dominant society to use with people who sought to demean, dehumanize, and suppress them. This mother tongue misled, confused, tricked, or made a fool of oppressor and tried to keep the oppressor off balance. The first strategy was using tools of subtle resistance. Stover writes that this meant using concealment, guilt, hesitations, mumbling, secrecy, shapes in point of view, silence, and whispering. Jacobs often steps away from the narrative to offer her critique or her interpretation of events. She also uses rhetorical questions in order to provoke a feeling or emotion in her readership without directly criticizing them. She demonstrates how whispering was a way for slaves to communicate with each other since much direct contact was limited. This mother tongue of silence allowed slaves to withhold information and conceal their true feelings or what they have seen or heard. The second strategy is masking, a tool that says one thing but means another. This includes biblical, allusion or allegory, dissembling, innuendo, ironic humor, laughter, misdirection, physical antics, sarcasm, signals, song, and understatement. In regards to biblical allusion, Harriet often evokes the snake as a symbol for slavery or slaveholders, an allusion to the Garden of Eden, as well as the abolitionist symbol of its cause. She also uses misdirection later in the text, trying to fool Dr. Flint about her true whereabouts and uses disguise to conceal her escape. So the third is tool of flagrant resistance, such as back talk, impertinence, impudence, insolence, invective, irony, lying, rage, and sass. Harriet is often very bold with Dr. Flint. Her grandmother is as well. She also does not shy away from exhorting northern women to heed her situation. Within the text, the character of Beatty exemplifies black women, Sass and Benjamin and William embody rage. So the autobiography was a way of African American women to preserve their personal and cultural memory while at the same time challenging the sociopolitical, economic, and literary structures that minimize the contributions of the culture.